Now, the next one that we are going to do is study the colonial novel, which is said to be post-colonial novel, like discuss No Longer at Ease as a post-colonial novel. So how does No Longer at Ease brings out the modern African title in post-colonial times? It is a very big question. Post-colonial times, taking the novel to be as a post-colonial novel because it is during the British period that it was written. Whatever it is, post-colonial period it was written. Now, Obi Okonowa as a post-colonial subject is very important question for the university exams in Chinua Achebe is no longer at ease. Age of post-colonial novel, Chinua Achebe novel, no longer at ease, describes the twilight zone between the British rule of Nigeria and the country's independence. It is a transitional period during which the whites are leaving the country and the natives are getting responsible for their own lives. Colonialism is giving way to a post-colonial situation. Nigerians are now forced to negotiate the claims of both colonial modernity and the previously degraded African mode of life. The period of transition is one in which binary oppositions, colonial versus American modernity versus tradition, seems to be collapsing, unveiling, and Mudimbe, one of the critics, calls the strong tension between a modernity that often is an illusion of development and a tradition that sometimes reflects a poor image of a mythical past. No Longer at Ease was first published in 1960, as I told you earlier, the year of Nigeria's independence from England. So this is significant because it is a novel that pertains to a trend of literature called post-colonial literature that still survives. There are many issues that arise out of post-colonialism, issues that authors and writers around the world have had to deal with. Africa, India, and the West Indies all have come out of the colonial era with a new literature that must address the problems that colonialism left. Now, you see, you might be asking me that did it leave anything? Yes, they have left many things. This colonialism. Some of the problems in post-colonial regions concern language, education, the conflict between traditional ways and Western or European ways, the presence of the English and corruption. Those who later moved into the land of the colonizer, for instance, Obi, while studying in England, experience an entire set of new problems such as nostalgia for home, memory, and the desire for the homeland. So when Obi returns from his studies in England, he is an honest, idealistic young man. He takes a high paying job in the civil service, but soon finds that his salary is not sufficient to meet the financial demands made upon him. It happens to all who come from abroad and settles in his own countries and finds that he is poorly paid. He also gets involved with a woman his parents and the clan despise. They don't like. Clara belongs to the Obi clan. In the end, he's caught taking bribes and is sent to prison. Undoubtedly, many of the problems confronting Obi Okonowa arise from his uneasy situation in the space between a diminishing colonialism and an emerging Nigerian nation. The major conflict of No Longer at Ease is the fact that Obi Okonowa, the protagonist of the novel, is caught between two worlds, that of a traditional Africa and that of a changing and new world and that lives amidst two cultures, the English and the Africans. It also happens with us. A young man is caught in between tradition and the ways of the West in his homeland. Towards the end of the colonial reign, he is entrapped in the dialectic of difference and identity. Obi finds that he cannot completely dissociate himself from the colonial culture which he has inherited from his father, nor can he totally identify with the Igbo culture of his ancestors. Obi got into this country because of the education he has received in England. It is the higher education he has received that put Obi in a position where he is no longer at ease. So, no longer at ease takes place in historical time, but it's a personal story rather than a historical one. Achebe, writing in later 1950s, wished apparently to deal with the alienation such educated young men as himself felt in the new nation moving swiftly towards independence. Upon their return, those who have been educated in England face different problems. They have to develop a different kind of worldview they never had before. Furthermore, local customs make them bentos, the precarious intelligentsia, they are called. Bentos, Bentos, and they feel uncomfortable. According to Simon Gaikendi, another critic, no longer at ease takes up the question of the exact authority of custom and what spaces sustain it, given the challenge posed by the forces of colonialism, which is seeking the society space with the auto we said autochthonous culture, two cultures into one. As a result of this contest between the forces of colonialism and authority of indigenous custom, Obi constantly struggles to define himself in the two contending spaces. The schizophrenic, inherited space in Umuofia, and his transplanted local Lagos, which is fully under the hegemony of colonialism. Just a minute, our actor notice system to build again. Just a minute, a minute. হ্যাঁ হ্যালো শুনতে পাচ্ছ তো আচ্ছা now one of the most important aspects of Obi's life is that he was educated in England. Obi Okonoa is a young man born in Igbo in the eastern Nigerian village of Umuofia. He was well educated and eventually sent to study law in England. The Umuofia Progressive Union had raised money for a scholarship for his brightest young man to study abroad. The union believes in education and they want him to study law so that he may help them with their land cases. But Obi eventually changed his course of study from law to English. The irony is that he learned nothing about the law but studied English instead and ends in cop in court. This is a perfect metaphor for the novel. The idea that he left what the Europeans wanted him to study, which was in order to pursue the language and literature of the colonizers, which did not help his as much as bring him hardship. So when it was time for Obi to leave, শুনছো তো তুমি? It was a huge occasion in the town for one of his young men to go and study in England because he has gone with their money, and therefore his father, Isaac Okunwa, made a big feast for his son's farewell. It happens in every country. It happens in our country also. When our sons leave for abroad, we organize a very big party. This also underlines the significance of Obi's departure to England. So everybody is celebrating because Obi will receive education in England. They expect a good return on the investment because Obi is the kinsman. The oratory in Umofia before Obi goes abroad exposes the people's expectation, that is, the driving force behind Obi's view of his role as well as his internal conflict and alienation from the center of being, the clan and his family. So, according to a famous critic, Okichikuwa, you have to remember the name, Okichikuwa, there is a man of two worlds, motives in all his encounters with his people, whether they are praying for his safety, advising him on his conduct. A few days before Obi's departure, Obi's parents called a prayer meeting at their home, during which the Reverend Samuel Ikedi sees the occasion as fulfilling biblical prophecy. The people of Umofia have been sitting in darkness, and Obi's departure to England for further studies is an act of bringing light to his people. Even before he leaves, Obi has been given the burden of bringing light to his dark village. This light has the power to rescue him from the region and the shadow of death. For the Christian pastor who looks after the church, Obi's scripting and represents not to step into different culture and set of values, but a new form of fulfilling traditional expectation. He's not sent to bring home human needs as his ancestors did, but knowledge. Obi is also admonished not to give himself to the pleasure of women. So he should not be a womanizer. As always, the concern is with the welfare of the clan, the community to which individual desires must always be subordinate. Obi stays in England for nearly 4 years, at times longing for the warm weather of home and all the other nostalgic qualities his memory supplies him during long winter abroad. Nevertheless, his arrival is less than what he had expected. His homecoming was not in the end the happy event he had dreamt of. The reason was his mother. She had grown so old and frail that he could hardly believe it. In his book Reading Chinua Achebe, Simon Gaikandi argues that the withering of the mother, the symbol of the homeland and the source of life, already points to Obi's tenuous state in Umofia. Furthermore, Obi's rejection of his father's God signals his rebellion from his paternal authority. Back home in Umofia, Obi cannot reconnect with things as they were before his departure to England. The fact that he went to England to study and has returned puts him in a peculiar position, one in which he will have to face the issues of a man torn between his own countrymen and what he has learned in the hands of those who have colonized his country, the English. This small fact molds the way others treat him and shapes what others expect of him. At the same time, the education he holds dear is also one for which he has felt guilt and one which has often made him a stranger in his own Nigeria. It would have happened the same with us if we had been to abroad and returned home all of a sudden. Our country would become like a stranger to us because you have just changed the culture from one to the other. So upon his return from England, Obi secured a position in the civil service, given a car, money, and respect. However, Chuku claims that Obi is coming home without informing the Umofian Progressive Union, those who have arranged to send him abroad. Beforehand, robs his kinsmen the opportunity to display their pride and bask in their achievement of having trained someone overseas. They are proud of him. He's already starting to gradually lose the awe that his position in the civil service, his exposure overseas, and his acquisition of Western education should have given him. So the European Progressive Union that provided him the passage money has a reception for Obi in honor of his return after having studied in England. His fellow Europeans are very proud of having someone from their village that studied in England president, and the president gives him a long spirited speech about Obi and about knowledge. He does so in a full formal English which the members of the union liked very much. In his study of Nigerian nationalism, Coleman reminds us, another critic reminds us that the generation which still looks up to the colonizers as its model of behavior is characterized by the misuse of or overuse of long words, in the use of pompous oratory, and in the ostentatious display of educational attainment. Simple grammar does not impress this generation. The value of words does not lie in their meaning but sounds. So Obi makes several mistakes at his reception. First, he arrives informally dressed and then he speaks in an informal English. His kinsmen are unimpressed by his speech, and Obi has robbed himself of another opportunity for placing himself on the pedestal where his people expect him to stay. Obi does not realize that he must dress a certain way, and because is hot, he simply wears short sleeves. He speaks English with less formality and English of is and was because he is used to the language and it is not strange to his tongue. According to Okichukwu, another critic, Obi's speech buttresses Achive's implicit argument that British education is inadequate for preparing a future Nigerian leader. So Chinua Achebe's anti-colonial novels are still relevant today, even it is still read abroad and everywhere because of his impartial way of dealing with the situation. And his seminal work, Things Falls Apart, was the first in an African trilogy that set about establishing the validity of life in tribal Nigeria in the late 19th century, before the civilizing colonialism of Christian missionaries arrived. Achebe paints a picture of village life that is valid, poignant, but also brutal. Compare with ours, the same thing happened in our country. With no judgment or steer as a narrator, he succeeds in presenting a community that is robust with strong moves and religious values and morally upright characters trying to do their best. He succeeds so well that despite also being shown this life's cruelty, the reader is left reeling with sympathy when the Christian missionaries come to the village and impose the British colonial system, which stamp the old life out as one would kick over an ant hill. As an African Arab growing up in post colonial East Africa, I had not read before an indigenous interpretation of regional history that wasn't either a non critical celebration of pre colonial past or a wretched condemnation of it as one that must be deficient if it succumbs so easily to invasion. Achebe was the first African writer who painted a non-romantic picture of this tribal life without apologizing for the bad or praising of the good. No question of good and bad come. It comes the change of culture was strong and functional, but Christian missionaries would not have made any inroads were there, not dissatisfaction with its brutal justice, ethnic discrimination, and religious rigidity. So naturally, Achibe's writing isn't anything as banal as cultural relativism, something he has been accused of, but a powerful refutation of the fact that before the white man, Africa was a black sheet of civilization. Even today, it is considered to be as so. Once things did fall apart, with the West fully taking the regions of governance either directly or by proxy, what replaced the old way? an uncomfortable mix of modern and traditional that still ended in tragedy. So you see, no longer at ease is a very common sentiment that is found everywhere around the world. Perhaps the most relevant of Achievements works to my generation is No Longer at Ease, the second book of astrology, which powerfully exposed the difficulty of navigating a world where one is expected to partake of Western secular education and all the values and privileges that comes with it, and still be hostage to the commanding beliefs of one's own culture. It is a heart-wrenching account of the grandchild of the main character in Things Fall Apart, who joins the Nigerian colonial civil service after receiving a British education but struggles to escape the conflicting molds of his family. A tragic modern protagonist with a foot in both camps. So, in the third novel, this is a trilogy I told you he has written. So, in the third novel, Arrow of God, Achibe elaborates on political disruption and shows how closely the land, agriculture, subsistence of villagers were tied to religion. When the new colonial administrator tries to co-opt the chief priest, the latter rejects the offer and is thrown in prison. So in rebellion and religious hubris, he refuses to call for a harvest and the yams rot in the field. Yams, the food that they prefer to grow in the fields. There ensues a famine that results in many converting to Christianity in rejection of a system that the white Christian missionaries convinced them had allowed them to starve. It is a simple narrative of the practical difficulties in governing societies under two conflicting political systems rooted in incompatible values. There are still echoes of this in the present, where the Western style democracy is offered as an absolute panacea for all the Orient ills. So this African trilogy is still relevant today. Western's intervention is routinely justified under the guise of moral concern, and political turmoil is often sparked by an imposition of Western style governance. In our increasingly global world, civilization superiority can also be cloaked in ostensibly benign concepts. The promotion of democracy, self determination, the liberation of women. Achieves a memoir. This is a memoir. Begins with the Igbo proverb. A man who does not know where the rain began to beat him cannot say where he dried his body. So, this is very natural. How you got wet and where you dried yourself is very difficult to say. His work tried to isolate when the defeat of colonized societies began. It is an important question if we were to carve a path independent of post-colonialist ushering into civilization. Achieve was a visionary who traced the modern tragedy of the dehumanizing effects of cultural arrogance and absolutism, which all colonizers practiced, and how they are manifested as the moral arms of cynical campaigns still at work today in Iraq, Afghanistan, India, and many other places in the world, around the world. Even in Russia, indeed, the missionaries are still coming to the village, knowing fully well that they are not at all acceptable and the people would not accept them. So,